This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 30 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Engaging Experts. I'm your host, Noah Balmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Miss Laura DuPriest to the show. Now, Miss DuPriest is the founder of a day spa and cosmetics line. She's a clinical licensed esthetician, manicurist, cosmetologist, and spa therapist. She's a published author and sought-after expert witness with over 20 years of expert witnessing experience. Ms. DuPriest, thank you so much for joining me here today on Engaging Experts.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Of course. Let's jump into it. So from runway model to entrepreneur, you have over 40 years in beauty expertise. How did you first get involved in expert witnessing?
Well, that's probably a question you ask many experts, and all of my friends and family ask me the same question. I initially got involved because I was doing the hair of a client who happened to be an attorney. And he knew I was a makeup artist as well. This was in my salon in downtown Sacramento at the Hyatt Regency. And we saw a lot of business people there. And he said, Laura, I need to ask you a question about how makeup can cover bruises. And I went, well, that's an odd question from a male. I said, sure. What's in regards to what? And he explained that he had a case where there was a domestic violence situation, and he was defending the one of the parties who claimed that the other party had falsified physical abuse, and that they believed this was done by, with makeup or makeup creation. I can't remember exactly how it went. And so I agreed to look at it, and he in fact had me testify in court just as a makeup artist, not as an expert. And then a few years later, in 2005, I got a phone call from a law firm in Oregon who wanted to know if I could look at a file and be their expert. Well, I didn't understand really at that time expert in the legal world. Expert in my world was someone who was just good at something. So I agreed to look at the file, and I gave them what I thought in a phone call. Well, then what came next was, well, can you write a report? And I said, okay. Well, I had to contact some friends that were attorneys to find out what do you do when you write a report? So my engagement initially was very, from a novice point of view, and it took maybe one case a year requested by, attorneys from California mostly, until finally it got to be an understanding with myself that this was actually something that a lot of people do in different fields. So it kind of started as a trickle, really.
That's really interesting. You mentioned that when you were first brought on, you had to do a little bit of outside research to find out exactly, hey, what is an expert witness report? What exactly is the format? How does this go? Would you advise attorneys that are working with newer expert witnesses that they could be doing a better job in informing their new expert witnesses on exactly what is required of them?
Well, that's a good question. So I come from a center of my universe as integrity and authenticity. So I always say, if you don't know, ask, which I did. And also, there's a way to come about the expert witness from the expert witness position in different manners. For instance, some people take classes and try to become certified in experts. I've never done that because I was still engaged in my career. I owned salons at the time. I was, even a celebrity hairstylist as well as a regular hairstylist. And what that means is that I had my clientele from the neighborhood at my salons, and I also had people that I had to go fly and be a hairstylist and makeup artist for. And I still do that, by the way. I still fly places for my clinical work. So you're always caught between how to handle your expert work with your clinical work. And a lot of us that are experts, and many attorneys, want an expert to still be in their field so that they can be current and relevant to whatever is going on. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think that attorneys always want to assume that their expert is experienced, but many people are not. They could be an expert in their field, but very unfamiliar with legal language, what a report looks like, how to present a report. And even after 20 years in the business, I ask my counselors, I'll say, what format do you want the report? Because some of them will want it just in a Word document and others will want it in a pleading document. So to answer your question, I think when attorneys solicit an expert or hire an expert, no matter what their CV says, to give them a little bit of framework as far as what they're looking for in the opinion in the final report or testimony, if that makes any sense.
It does. Let's talk a little bit more about those initial phone calls. So you get on the phone, you get a call from an attorney or maybe a paralegal, somebody from their office. How does that phone call go? What are the sorts of things that they're looking for? And what are the sorts of things that you're looking for when deciding whether or not to accept an expert engagement?
Good question. First of all, I always want to make sure the people that are soliciting my expertise know that I am a consultant and an expert witness because I approach the case as a consultant. I will consult with you briefly, 10 or 15 minutes on the phone to find out a few things because I do not want to involve myself in a case where I know I won't be able to either defend it or find the standards have been violated. So first step before that even is to make sure that I have no conflicts. So I set up a 10 or 15-minute phone call or a Zoom call, and we want to make sure that I haven't heard from the opposing counsel on the case in some format. And if there are no conflicts of interest in me being a participant in the case, then I just like to let them tell me what happened, basically what happened in your view. And then the next step is I ask a few questions because I want to make sure that I'm a good representational fit for them, for their case.
Sure. And so you've decided that this makes sense and it's a good fit. What are the next steps from there? Do you have any specific terms that you like to have in your contracts? For example, do you take a retainer? Do you like to bill project rates, hourly rates? How do you handle your contracts?
That's a good question too. And of course, I did not have a clue how to do any of this in the beginning. Absolutely none. I was reliant on the legal law firms. And I would say to them, do you have a standard agreement? And they would email me that. Eventually, after having several of these, I compiled my own agreement, which is very templative. It's just a very basic template agreement. And I send it with my rate and I ask for a retainer, which is the equivalent of 10 hours up front to start the case. And what that retainer ensures the counselors is I can hold time. It gives them the assurance that I have the time and the bandwidth in my schedule, whether it be with hair and all the things that I do to see that case through. So it's basically a 10 hours upfront fee, and then I bill against that per hour. And I send the fee schedule as well. Mhm.
Have you done a significant amount of travel as an expert witness? I know you do for your clinical work, but have you, as an expert witness, done significant travel?
I will tell you that before COVID, only two cases that I actually traveled to do a trial. Attorneys seemed to wanted, when I was in Southern California, they wanted to travel to me for a deposition. I assume because it was something that was convenient to maybe, see Southern California or see family in addition, as an attachment to that. But then COVID hit, and of course, as you know, many courts is actually shut down and there wasn't a lot of activity. And now since COVID, many courts and judges allow Zoom testimony and Zoom depositions. So the travel has been less, but I will tell you that travel in what I would say are larger cases, the cases involving, business disputes, patent cases, things like that, there's still an in-presence need for all trials and depositions.
When it comes to travel, is this typically a reimbursement sort of basis, or do they arrange travel for you? How do you typically handle travel in your contracts and then just mechanically?
In my contracts, I simply talk about the fee for travel. There's an hour, dollar per hour fee for actually traveling in the air. Now, for me, if I'm traveling in the air and I'm working on maybe a side case, a different case, and I'm studying on that case, I won't bill for my travel for that attorney. I never double bill. I'm very careful about that. And I don't bill for a hotel room, the time in the hotel. I'm pretty easygoing because I have other things that I can be, doing, obviously. So travel is billed and stated in the contract as a per hour, a much lesser fee, of course, than expert testimony fee. And then I am responsible to arrange my own travel. So far, all the travel is you arrange it on a refundable basis. That's in case the case settles. And you simply add that to your billing once your travel has concluded.
You had mentioned Zoom, which is an interesting thing that I've heard from a lot of expert witnesses, that a lot of depositions, sometimes even trials, have moved to Zoom. How do you feel about telepresence in court actions in general? Do you enjoy them? Do you like being at home around, the kitty cat, or do you prefer to be there in person? Is there a difference in the way that you connect to a jury or have to present yourself in terms of demeanor? How has Zoom affected you as an expert witness?
Well, I can't speak for what the attorneys may feel, but I feel that in presence is immensely more valuable. In the first place, I worry when I'm scheduled for a Zoom testimony, I worry that there'll be a technical difficulty. And let's face it, as the witness, I have to operate my own technical side. I don't have someone sitting with me to take care of if something goes wrong on my end. So that's always stress. And for me, and what my attorneys that I've worked with that wanted an in-person witness, their feeling is that it has more impact. It just has more impact when the jury can see you in person. And I think there's impact as well when the jury sees you walking to the bench and away from the bench. They're sizing up your credibility at all, in all instances, no matter what the judge's instructions are. This is my personal feeling. But let's face it, I'm from the beauty industry where visual is everything, everything about the beauty business has a visual side to it. So I'm going to be the person that will say, I feel that the in-presence testimony, even in a deposition with attorneys present in the room, has more impact.
That's a really interesting connection between your work in the in the beauty niche with expert witnessing. In what way has your work in the beauty industry affected the way that you go about expert witnessing and connecting with juries?
Well, let's start basically with a paper report. Reports can be very dry if they're just filled with words. And a lot of the way I started out as a witness was testifying for injuries that may or may not have happened in a salon, or if they did happen, was there a standard that was violated? And many times they're just purely an accident. Other times there was negligence involved with that injury. So I like to show exactly what we're talking about, because if you say someone got a burn from a chemical on their head, that doesn't have as much impact as showing the end result of a very large bald spot. So visually, I'm a visual person anyway, and that probably came from the beauty world and the modeling world. So a picture can paint impact, and also body language and the way someone presents can obviously give people an understanding as to how credible they are, for instance. That's just my feeling.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about preparation. When you're getting ready for a deposition or a trial, what sorts of routines do you have, or do you? I've had expert witnesses tell me that they like to have a big meal or have coffee or nothing or meditate. Do you have a pre-deposition or pre-trial ritual that helps you prepare yourself for what's coming?
As far as that day, as in a, preparing for it, as if a stage performer prepared for a performance, no, not at all, because depositions are usually scheduled not super early. They're usually, a 9 or 10 event. And so I try not to have too much coffee, but I have come to learn as an expert that's done more than 1 or 2 depositions, you're perfectly welcome to take breaks as you need to. So I don't worry about that side of it. I like to be extraordinarily prepared. And what I mean by that is I review everything I reviewed from the very beginning when I wrote my report, and I always review my opinion report, but I also review opposing counsel's opinion experts just to make sure that I have every understanding. So it's kind of like um, you really can't fake an exam. You have to be prepared. And so the preparation for me is making sure I have enough sleep and a day or two ahead of time to thoroughly prepare. And if you're thoroughly prepared, then I really have no other trade secrets.
Of course. Are there a couple of stories that you have or cases that you recall that either change the way that you go about some fundamental part of expert witnessing or reinforce something that you already do?
The biggest advice I can give or experience, and I will tag a few stories in here, is to every time you read a case, read their experts' reports very thoroughly, not only in what they say, but how they format them and what standards are they using. It's interesting because I have found in my field, not made up standards, but standards that are irrelevant. For instance, somebody might have been injured in a particular way in a salon, but the opposing expert cites, well, they didn't wear gloves, but the wearing of the gloves had nothing to do with the injury. In other words, a lot of experts will throw, I call it spaghetti at the wall and hope something sticks. I try not to do that because as I'm reading those reports, I can see what their process is. I want to opine on specific, concise standards that were actually particular to what happened in the injury or in a manufacturing case, for instance, in that case. So being very concise is important to me, and not filling the report up with extra words that aren't important to the case. So I definitely have learned to hone my own ability to articulate by reading other experts. Even if they're dry and boring and long, I read them, and it gives me a lot of insight.
Absolutely. And as somebody who's worked on both the defense and plaintiff side as an expert witness, I imagine that you've had to write rebuttal reports, which involve exactly what you're talking about, kind of taking apart the other person's report. Do you have a preference on working for either the plaintiff or the defendant side, or for writing initial or rebuttal reports?
I really don't, because in the beginning I was just asked by both sides, and since I really wasn't truly experienced on even how the defense side works or the plaintiff side, let's take an injury case, for example. Certainly, if someone gets hurt, I have compassion for the injury, but oftentimes an injury can be inflated as to, how much money should be awarded for that. And so I I have to kind of look at that side of it, as well as the fact that in our legal system, everyone deserves a defense. That's the way our legal system is built. So I used to think, well, how can I work defending a salon that possibly hurt somebody? But again, I love my industry, and the salon industry is an amazing industry with many talented people. So I want to make sure that the facts are to the case are relevant. So in defending someone that it was involved in injuring someone in a salon, it has to be presented in such a way that is truthful and real. And like I said, many times injuries can be, an unfortunate accident versus somebody that is just not following regulations and sanitary rules and really causing harm.
In your cases, have you worked on a lot of extensive teams behind the scenes? Do you work with or alongside other expert witnesses when you are typically in an engagement?
I have in larger cases that involve um, manufacturing, or for instance, I've worked on a couple of patent cases, and I can't speak a lot about that because one of them is still pending. But in that regard, it involves a lot of moving parts. So it's not just one person who was cutting someone's hair and something happened. That in that instance, there can be a lot of reasons to bring in different experts. There might be someone that's versed in the engineering of a product, someone else that's understands the chemistry of a product. So I've had to be on a team with the last big team I worked with, there was 8 other experts. So I have to review their reports as well so that I understand how they contributed to the case.
And how does that interfacing work? Do you work pretty closely with them, or do you feel pretty cordoned off from each other?
We don't work together closely, but what does happen is if I'm opining on parts of my report in an area that I'm not an expert in, like for instance, I'm not a doctor, so oftentimes I will read an emergency room report so I can understand what how soon after the salon injury did the plaintiff go to the hospital, for instance. And I will read the medical report, but I'm clearly staying in my line of cosmetology because I'm not a doctor. So I don't talk to the doctor, but I might read their report. But if I have questions, counselors may set up a Zoom meeting where I can, Zoom with the physician to get my questions answered. And again, it's very important. I would say this is probably one of the most important aspects of being an expert is your field is your field. And you don't step outside of those lines. An example for that is I've come across another cosmetology expert and I learned not crossing the line because they were disqualified in a particular case for offering a medical opinion. And so it's really, really important that when you're working with a team of experts that you kind of really stay in your lane, if that makes any sense.
It does. You had mentioned earlier that this is kind of a small niche and there really is only a handful of experts doing exactly what you do. Does that mean that you come face to face with kind of the same group of experts time after time when you get called before a case?
Yes. Yes. I have probably two other people in my particular field that I regularly see on the opposite side, or in interviewing me, the attorneys let me know that, we found you, but there's nobody else in the field. And I've heard that a lot too. And I think it's particularly in the cosmetology field because um, career professionals in the cosmetology world may not have ever had the opportunity to become an expert, or they don't stay in the field long enough. I'm kind of rare. This is my 44th year in the cosmetology field. And I started as a manicurist, and then after 10 years moved to aesthetics and then moved to hair. So I kind of and continued to do all three, as a matter of fact, because of my clientele interface. So I think the reason that there aren't a lot of experts in my particular field is just because individuals don't stay in that field for a long time. They might, for instance, you know, interrupt their career to have a baby, or they got into the hair field and they didn't find it enjoyable or whatever.
Does that ever create any friction between you and other expert witnesses if you see them time after time and you have to kind of take apart each other? Or does it make it easier because you kind of understand who it is that you're going to be coming up against?
Well, I've never interacted personally so far with the other experts. The other experts, with the exception of one it was an isolated case. It wasn't a salon injury case. So you don't really interact with them, and you do get used to the reports. Sometimes I can say to the attorney that is interviewing me, who is your expert on the other side of the case? And they'll let me know. And I'll say, well, I've worked, I've seen their reports before. So this is what I anticipate, will be opined on, because you can anticipate that to a degree. So but I haven't ever interacted directly with them. I have respect for anyone who is an expert in this field because in the first place, you didn't get put there because you were a beginner in your field. And so obviously there's tremendous respect. I don't always agree with the opinion, of course, but there is respect.
What makes for a good relationship from the outset and then ongoing between an expert and the attorney that they're engaged by?
Well, I can go by what I think, and I can also share a little feedback I've received. Transparency and communication. So a couple of instances I can tell you is when the attorney had a schedule anticipated that was faster than they allowed for, in my opinion. Like, they asked me for a report next week. I just let them know what my parameters are and what my availability is and see if there's a way to work it out, or I don't take the case. And the secondly is just to make sure, like if I'm delayed, sometimes I'm working on a report and I'm have promised that it will be arriving in the next week, and then something comes up with a case that, was from a month ago that they have an emergency situation. I just send an email. I'll let them know I've had a slight delay and I will be circling back to this on this day. As I find that as long as you have really good communication skills and let them know what's going on, then there's you can always reach an agreement. So other than that, just to make sure you're real transparent, and especially in the initial interview, because I've particularly in defense work, if I feel that their injury was, going to be settled on the plaintiff's behalf, and the salon that I'm been asked to defend, I'll be very upfront. I'll say, this is what happened and this is what mistakes were made. And I'm going to have to, let you know that maybe I'm not the right person for you, or I won't be able to officially opine on the report because it won't benefit you. I just let them know.
Sure. Do you find that it's important to solicit feedback from your engagements? I know that a lot of expert witnesses, may leave the action long before it's finished because they only have a portion to do in court, or because it goes to settlement and they might not hear from the attorney after that. Should expert witnesses be soliciting feedback to see how they did, what they did right, how they could improve? Or is that something that you kind of prefer to learn on your own?
No, I always ask for feedback. And when a case settles, if the attorney calls me personally or their paralegal does, or they send me an email, and we've been very familiar during the engagement. And what I mean by that is regular Zoom calls or regular phone calls. I always ask for a 10-minute Zoom wrap-up call. And I do a Zoom on purpose because I want to be able to understand if there was something that they felt I was lacking in or could improve, but they often don't have time for that. So I have to kind of feel out by their pace. Some people do, some people don't. I have had attorneys also, when they send me the email that the case has settled, they offer, some sort of positive opinion, like it was wonderful to work with you. I look forward to working with you again. Sometimes that could just be their standard wrap up for a case, but many times they'll recommend me for another case. So it just depends on, attorneys are so busy. That's the one thing I didn't understand as an expert, and I have great empathy for it because I have a daughter that's an attorney.
Hmm.
So I now understand the world on the other side, and the time constraints and the available bandwidth for attorneys in their schedule is really rough. So I understand that more now than I did 20 years ago when I started.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It certainly has changed. Before we wrap up, you had mentioned before that you don't do a lot of marketing. Have you found that expert witness referral services have been useful?
I never went looking for expert work. Expert work found me because of, like I said, there's very few of us in the cosmetology and beauty field as experts. I feel like it should be a natural occurrence. An attorney can find you if they need you, and if they need the help of a referral service, then I think that that's very, very beneficial. So I leave that up to the natural progress, the organic evolution of how that occurs, because I think that as an expert, you have to remain in your corner of the world and very true to the nature of your business. So whereas in the hair world, we market to people all of the time, and we're always trying to let them know what our abilities are and our services is, it's a little different in the expert work. But when I've been contacted by a referral agency, I will fill out the profile so they have my information, but I really haven't found that it just hasn't been in my wheelhouse to actively go and solicit. I've been fortunate to be very busy.
Before we wrap up, do you have any last advice for expert witnesses, and particularly newer expert witnesses, or even attorneys working with newer expert witnesses?
What really does help is just have clear statement of facts that they could read over the phone, or if they don't feel like emailing them, but a statement of facts so that you can really see, like, for instance, the name of the salon, the state, because what I'll initially do is do a quick overview of the laws in that state. I'm licensed, by the way, in North Carolina and in California, but many of the statutes are overlapping and they're fairly consistent in the standards. But knowing a little bit more about the case and what exactly happened, not, for instance, she went to a nail salon and they hurt her nail. That doesn't help me. I need to understand, was there an illegal tool used? What did they pull it out of their pocket or a drawer instead of out of a sanitary container? So some facts are really helpful so that we can figure out if there is a standard and a violation of standards that could be assessed for the case. And as far as experts go, read up about it. Do some searches about what it takes to be an expert. I would not necessarily sign myself up for a certification program, because I think it's important in our field not to be a pay-to-play expert witness. I think you learn on the job and you learn case by case, but you can certainly do searches and ask, what does it take to be an expert witness and things like that, if that makes sense.
It does. Sage advice. Miss DuPriest, thank you so much for joining me here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to our listeners for joining me for another episode of Engaging Experts. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Engaging Experts. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com.